All right. So, welcome to Silent Book Club Author Chats. My name is Guinevere. I'm one of the co-founders of Silent Book Club with my partner, Laura Gluhanek. And tonight joining us is Lisa Duffy. Lisa is the author of My Kind of People, which is her third novel. And prior to that, she published The Salt House in 2017 and This Is Home in 2019. So she is a prolific writer. I can't wait to hear about how you pulled off 3 books in 3 years. But without further ado, I would just like to welcome Lisa and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry that we got rescheduled because of the storm, but I'm so happy that we were able to just reschedule it till tonight, and looking forward to talking to your book club and answering any questions that you might have.
Well, I'm really glad that we have actual light and that you're not just, sort of in the glow of your fire. And I'm glad to hear that your house made it through all right, despite some power outages. So to start off, I know that not everybody has read the book. So I was wondering if you could give us just a little sort of background overview of the book itself, and then talk a little bit about your inspiration for writing it.
Yeah, sure I can. So as you said, this is my third novel, and it's about a young girl, Sky, who is orphaned for the second time in her life when her parents are killed in a car accident. It's set on the fictional island of Ichabod, which is about 12 miles off the coast of Massachusetts. And it picks up right when the summer's sort of kicking off. And it's an island that it's sort of loosely based on Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, and that it has a K through 12 school system on its own, but it really has a robust summer population, and then it sort of empties out, when the season's over. So really, it picks up sort of as the tourists are arriving. And it really focuses on the group of people that sort of come together to take care of Sky. So not only are they on this sort of isolated island, but she lives on a street called Winding Way. And after her parents pass away, she finds herself sort of in the care of their best friend, her guardian because of the will, Leo, and his husband, Xavier, who is less than happy to be, sort of forced to come over to this island, and struggling with all of a sudden being a parent as well. And across the street from her is our teacher, her 4th grade teacher, so former teacher really, Maggie, who sort of this middle-aged woman who's also married to the police chief of Ichabod, and sort of struggling in lots of ways in her marriage and her life. And then, not to give any spoilers away, but there's another point of view character who comes over to Ichabod, sort of for her own reasons, and you sort of have to read into, why she's there and how she fits into everything. But really, it's about a group of people who are diverse in age and gender and race and class, and how they all sort of have to come together on this small island, on this small street, and work together, and how their lives intersect and intertwine. So that's really the nutshell of what it's about. How I came to it, my books, I really wish I had a very straightforward answer, but I don't. I never do. I'm sort of a character-driven writer, so this book actually started years and years ago. I was getting my MFA in creative writing, and I was writing short stories. And I had written a short story that I really liked, but the short story itself, it really didn't work in the format. I wanted to be something longer. But there was a great scene between that I felt that I really liked the scene between a woman and her husband, and they've been married for, 20 plus years, and they're struggling in their marriage, and they go to see a marriage counselor, and he says, well, be nice to each other and mix it up and be spontaneous. And so they go home, and they find themselves in bed in the middle of the day, and they sort of think this is the spontaneous part because that never happens anymore. And it's sort of this intimate moment that goes like sort of awkwardly, funnily wrong. Um, and I loved that scene in the short story. And I had this great teacher at that particular time, and she was actually a poet, and she gave some great advice. And she said, whether you're a poet or a short story writer or novelist or an essayist, whatever you are, whatever type of writer you are, make sure that you always cannibalize your own work. Take your own work, and if something isn't working here, try it there. Or if you always know as a writer, sort of there's things that work, even though they may not work in a larger sense. And so when I started thinking about this book, I took that scene and I started working off of those two characters, and just started writing more about those two people and who they were and where they were from, and where they lived on the street. And that actually ended up being chapter 2 of the book. It's Maggie and Pete, and they were sort of the first two characters that let me sort of explore. And in the short story, they lived in like New York or something. I mean, it wasn't anything. I really literally took them and just started writing a little bit more about them. And I had the room to do that where I did not have it in the short story. And so all these other characters sort of came up. And one of the first characters that came up, the end of the second chapter, Maggie looks at her back door and she sees these two blue eyes staring at her. And it's this little girl. And I thought, well, who the hell is that? I mean, she literally just sort of appeared on the page. And I thought, well, now I have to figure out who this girl is. So it was all these sort of building blocks that led me to sort of populating the street with these different people. And the minute I started to do that, I knew I wanted it to be, about these characters who have this one single thing in common. Well, not one. They have two single things. They have sky in common, and they also have this piece of land in common. And at the time, socially, there was a lot of discussion going on about our land and who belongs here and who has a right to belong here. And that was sort of all. It was in my mind, like, why do people feel they have a right to a land? And what are the different reasons why they feel that way? And what if somebody moves to this land and feels just as powerful about it? And so there was all these different things that sort of went into that, on a very high level. And then I just sort of started digging deeper into this story. But I guess that's really where the inspiration came from, in the beginning.
That's so amazing how, it's sort of, you started with characters and then an entire story sort of built up around them. And, and I think that the character driven piece of it really comes through. I mean, particularly because the point of view changes from chapter to chapter. So, do you, when you're writing, do you hear these characters in your head? Is it difficult to switch perspective?
No, I wish it was, because I probably stopped writing that way. Like my first book, I had 4 different first person. Salt House is written in 4 different first person characters, and my second book, This Is Home, switches from a first to a third, and this one has obviously 4 different ones. So probably my agent and my editor would be happy if I stuck with one. It's just not as fun, I mean, I think mostly because I like to write about communities and families. I like to write about what makes up a family. And so in the different constructs and how that happens. And I think it's just more fun when you get more people in the book to actually speak. And so I don't have an issue with it at all. I think it takes me a lot of revision to get the voices as clear as I can. But a lot when I'm writing these characters, they often appear as who they are, and then I have to sort of follow that and try to get to know them as best as I can. So I spend a lot of time with them off the page. I try to, a lot of my writing is thinking about them while I'm walking the dog or going to sleep or taking a shower, or I love to just get in the car and drive and no radio. I mean, I rarely listen to anything in the car, and just sort of let the characters sort of um, come to life in my head in a way, so that when I do sit down to write, I have a better idea. And revision is big. I mean, I think there's a first draft, and then I can revise something maybe 20 to 30 times as a full draft to sort of get it to where I need it to be. But I love playing with point of view. It's one of my things that I just, as a writer, I find it, I find it challenging, but I find it really engaging too.
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook version,
But
and it was
yeah,
fantastic because they have different actors playing each of the
yeah,
characters, and it really, I mean, it just brings it to life.
yeah,
So it's definitely something I recommend, for any of you. I I I love listening to audiobooks that are written in multiple perspectives because it feels almost like theater. You're hearing different actors and voices, and
yeah. And
and
it's always, it's so challenging because, I'm published this through HA Books and they're wonderful. And so I get like a first choice and a second choice. And I'm always like, they're all so talented. I don't know. And it's sort of like, they send it to me and then it's sort of like, well, you must have an idea in your head of how somebody sounds. And I really don't. And I also am not a writer who has, some people put, they like, well, take pictures of people that look like their characters. And for me, it's always just a very, it's almost like in my mind, you know, when you see like sometimes like a crime photo where they blank out the face, that's exactly what it is for me too. I have like a very vague idea. I don't do a lot of physical description of people in my books because I like to let the reader sort of figure that out on your own. And I don't love when I'm reading something and there's a lot of physical description. I think, that's one of the great things to me about reading is that, you can sort of conjure up your own image of what characters, look like. Um, so it's wonderful when they do the audiobooks because I get to hear people and I think, oh, but they're all so talented that it's impossible to choose.
Yeah. So, well, I'm wondering, does this also apply to setting? Because, as you mentioned, Ichabod Island is an imaginary place, and it's sort of based loosely on Nantucket or Martha's Vineyard or Block Island. It's a New England sort of, it has that feel, but it's fictional. So, what kind of led your decision to create this place? Because the setting is such, I mean, it is a character in itself in the book.
Yeah. I always like to create, in my three books so far, there's always a fictional place, but that it's based, sort of located, somewhere where you would have an idea of where it is. And I feel like it just gives me freedom as a writer to not be sort of hemmed in by an actual place, and just be able to let my own curiosity sort of go from there. So I mean, I always like to start with sort of fictional places that I can just imagine. And interestingly enough, it is based, the island itself is sort of based loosely off of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, but I always sort of thought of it to be a little bit more working class. Not that there's not a working class on those two islands, but I've always loved going off season to places where they're not islands. They're just like if you look at the tourist parts of Maine, like York, Maine, where my mom had a house for years, or Chatham, Massachusetts, or Provincetown, Massachusetts. I love going to those places off season when they're just sort of fully who they are. Like the island, I mean the town themselves, you get such a sense of the residents and such a sense of what it's like to live in this place when maybe 80% of the restaurants closed down. And it, I always find it so fascinating and kind of, it's almost like, there's I think a certain personality that you need to have to live in those places, where, you're maybe snowed in, and there's not a lot of people around and you're dealing with some isolation and some loneliness, but maybe you like that too. And so that's one of the things that I loved about, thinking about Ichabod, was that, all of these characters, really besides Xavier, and a couple of the, minor characters, know what it's like to live on this island full time. And I just thought that it's such a binding, um, factor, to come from a place in New England, but also come from a place that, is so specific, and that you have this shared, experience. So that really, sort of went into the all the ideas about the setting. Um, I just find that type of lifestyle fascinating. I'd love to be able to do it, once I get the kids out. Like, I'd love to go live on an island, a snowy island for a year and
Mhm.
see what happens.
Hmm. Yeah. So I mean, yes, it does require a sort of a certain level of resilience,
Yeah.
and this actually leads perfectly into one of the questions that was submitted from Renata, actually in Mumbai, India, and she wrote, the themes of community resilience and being connected in tragedies are strongly resonant in light of the current pandemic. Um, how much did the current situation of the world influence or affect your writing? And, I mean, obviously there wasn't a pandemic while you were writing, but yeah, just in general, the sort of the state of the world and world events, how much of that influences your work?
It's so hard to say because, I don't ever think of my work thematically. I don't like, I don't go into it. I feel like that would be such a heavy burden as a writer to sort of take on, like, okay, well, I'm going to think about everything that's going on in the world and try to write something that somehow speaks to that. I think it's such a heavy, um, so, it's almost like, well, now that I've written it, I can look back and be like, oh, well, it's almost like I have to write it to look back and say, I can pull out, little things that I know were bothering me. I know I was definitely thinking about, um, the immigration, and just, how different people feel about being connected to this world, connected to this land. Um, but, there was no way that I was going to be able to tackle that. So you try to sort of find your own story in the midst of that. And I know, from Maggie's, I touch a little bit upon with Maggie and Pete, a little bit of the Me Too movement. Um, but I knew that, I had read an article actually that stuck with me. It was sort of this heartbreaking art. It was one of the first interviews that Georgina Chapman, Harvey Weinstein's ex-wife, gave to Vogue in 2018. And it's just such an honest interview where she talks about, um, how she thought she had a very happy marriage and she was in love with her husband. And she thought, she sort of thought she had it all. And it was a very honest. And she said, in the midst of sort of grieving the loss of, sort of her best friend and somebody who that, is the father to her children, she's in this sort of under, this public scrutiny of, how did she not know and why did she not know? Um, and so, I remember reading that and thinking, she's a victim in so many ways, but she's also just a woman grieving the loss of her marriage and the father of her children and her friend. And so, those sort of things, they're all there when you're writing. And it's just, how do you boil it down to your own micro level of being able to tackle it? You know, there's a great quote. I always get it wrong. It's by Richard Price. But he said, you don't write about war. you write about the child's bloody sock in the middle of the street. And, you know, that's what I've always, like, you know, you don't take on these big subjects and you don't even know. I mean, I think when you're writing, you have to sit down and find your characters, and then your characters will lead you, if you have these things on your mind, to throughout the story. So I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I feel like I just jumped in a circle.
It's all right. I'm gonna make you keep going because because I think that I mean you and your book is not afraid to tackle sort of some big issues. I mean, racism, sexuality, mental illness, like all of these play a role in the story. And as a writer, you have to kind of get into the head of these characters, and their experiences, may be very different from your own. I mean, and so so how do you I mean, one of the the protagonists are Black, and you're a white woman, a Black gay man.
Yeah.
So how do you as a writer, as an author, approach that?
You know, I think I approached Leo as a gay Black man. You know, I think he was just as difficult to write as, you know, a middle-aged white woman. I mean, I feel as an author, you're putting on a lot of different hats, and none of them fit. You know, I'm not writing memoir. I'm not writing nonfiction. So, you know, when you have a character sort of that you take on in a point of view, you have to do a lot of work to try to get to the heart of the character and in the heart of what they want. Um, and, you know, is it the right voice that you're telling it in? And are the parameters with which you're telling it doable? Um, and so for me, you know, Leo, immediately when I started writing him, there was nothing that he was going to be other than a gay Black man. He was on the page immediately as that. But he was also, I think, along with Sky, who's a biracial child, they were the two grounding characters for me who had such a sense of identity, who had such a sense of grounding to the island. And, you know, they were the two characters that sort of didn't have to really search too much for what they were looking for. You know, he's a very intelligent, educated, well-rounded man who is happy in his marriage, and he's faced with this really difficult choice. But through most of the book, he sort of doesn't waver. He's sort of willing to say, like, well, you know, I'm part of this island, and this is where I feel most at home. And I'm now have this, you know, life-changing thing that's happened to me, but I sort of know exactly what needs to happen. And so, you know, I felt comfortable in his voice, and I felt comfortable with that. I wasn't really tackling race for him. You know, he wasn't questioning his race, or he wasn't questioning how he felt. And I felt like, you know, everybody is on this one street, and they have a lot in common with how they have come up. So, you know, Leo and Brian are really not very different from each other in how they've come up into the world. And so, you know, I felt like with the parameters I could really work with his character, and they weren't going to be completely unknown to me, and I wasn't going to be trying to tackle something that I had, you know, was going to be far outside of my reach, and I was going to do any sort of harm, if that makes any sense. Um, and there, you know, it's not like I never set out to write a book about race. What I wanted to do was to write a group of people who were diverse. And so that was just sort of the byproduct. And I feel like it's a very small part of the book, but of course it's there because, you know, you have other characters who are sort of commenting, and so a lot of those bigger issues, I feel like when you get characters together who you hope to make flawed and real, there's just issues that naturally sort of filter down through the other characters, and everybody's sort of, you know, commenting and having their own opinions on it. So that's really where it came from.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a remarkable sort of point in time to publish your book. So your book published on May 12th, which was 2 weeks before George Floyd was murdered. And we were scheduled to talk on June 9th, and decided to postpone because of all of the Black Lives Matter protests that were going on across the country. And, and then of course we're in the middle of a pandemic. So,
Yeah.
there's just a lot going on in the world. And I imagine that's had a huge impact on sort of, how your book has emerged in the world. And I'm just curious about, kind of what has it been like for you to publish in, in the middle of all of the upheaval that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been, I've been really just sort of overwhelmed by everything that's, happened, I think, on the literary side of things. You have places, I mean, sort of things popping up like A Mighty Blaze, where you have, authors helping out authors and, sort of coming together so quickly to do author interviews. And I think, we knew maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I guess maybe even a couple of weeks before the book was supposed to launch. We had a full physical tour planned, but we sort of knew that that wasn't going to happen. And the turnaround time for bookstores getting online events going was so quick. It was crazy just how everybody sort of came together. So I actually felt like I had a really great launch. We had, I don't think there's one bookstore that wasn't able to do some sort of online event, which is wonderful. And then, like I said, A Mighty Blaze, they've been still, nonstop doing a lot of different events. And they're, I think with every curse, there's a blessing. And there's been a lot of, my own friends and family that have said that, they finally have been able to come to a launch of mine because, you get to sit in your living room in your pajamas and I have felt the same way. I mean, I've sat here and watched, John Irving and Stephen King and John Grisham and, Cheryl Strayed was on the other night. And it was like, what is going on? I think there's just, so, I think you just have to look at the bright side of things. And yeah, I mean, I'm an author, I publish books, but, I have, 3 kids at home. And, there's a lot of other stuff going on in the world. And I think I've, I've kept a healthy dose of perspective with this, that there's bigger stuff than publishing books going on. So I've been very thankful for anybody who's, logged on to any of my events. And, I think the response has been wonderful. And I hope it continues to go forward. I mean, it'd be wonderful if we can get into indie bookstores. Are just amazing. And there's nothing like doing an in-person event. But I really feel there's a huge place for these Zoom events to continue because I think they're wonderful. And, that just gives so many other people, if you can't leave your house, you can still participate.
Yeah, I mean, even, with Silent Book Club, it's been so fun because suddenly, Laura and I have been able to make, pop into like events and meetups like in Italy and in South Korea and in Kansas and, and so that part has, I think it really has brought people together. And then also just to be having this shared experience on a global level where, people are really having a sense of, our shared humanity. And we're all in it. So, what about your work? How is, your, I imagine, home sort of in
Yeah.
quarantine, like the rest of us.
Yeah.
Have you, are you working on a current project? Have you been able to
I
work
am.
through this?
I am. I'm working on something. I'm not sure. It's sort of still like headlights in the fog, sort of finding my way through it. Um, I think I'm going to, it's an interesting thing because I write commercial fiction. and I write, fiction that is set in the current time period that we're in. And I think there's uncertainty with writers, right? Who don't write historical fiction. How do you handle COVID? Do you put it in your story or do you not put it in your story? And how much of it do you put in the story? And so that's been a little bit, and nobody really has the answer. I mean, there's I think a lot of various you know editors and agents who probably have a lot of opinions on it, but who knows what next summer is going to look like for anybody. um but I feel like there's a great quote by Jack London that the most beautiful stories start with wreckage. And I can't imagine any more wreckage than what we've been through, what we're going through. And I think there's so many stories right now of people, coming out of, you know, having lost somebody from COVID, or having, had to change maybe where they live. There's so many stories that I've been following of people leaving cities to go somewhere else, or all of a sudden you have the luxury of being able to work from home. What does that look like? You can move somewhere else. So there's all these sort of really cool things that I'm considering, similar to what we talked about with, like, they're higher up thematic. And so how do you boil down and get your characters to really be true to, sort of what's going on in the world, and reflective of, what we're going through, but in a way that is still, to me, hopeful. I don't like to write stories that aren't based in hope, because they're not fun to write. So,
They're
I
hard
don't.
to read right now too.
Yeah. So, there's all those sorts of ideas sort of, going around in my head. And I'm just, really trying to show up at the desk for a couple hours every day. And sometimes it's literally, I'm not writing anything, and I'm just sort of, um, you know, trying to sort of play around with character. And other times I'll write a full chapter. So it's just the very beginning stages of something.
Mhm.
Um, but I've been on a deadline for a couple of years now, and it's nice to have a little bit of freedom.
Yeah. All right. So 3 books published in 3 years.
Kind of, not really, because so when I
Tell us
published
more.
so when I published The Salt House, that was in 2017, and that was my debut.
Mhm.
So I wrote that, sort of while I was raising my kids and working full time and getting my MFA. So it took about 8 years to write from first chapter to shelf. But I also had to find an agent, we had to sell the book. So that book, it's not like I wrote it from 2016 to 2017 and then it was on the shelves. That took, your debut baby is, has a gestation period. Mine did for 8 years. So then when I wrote my second novel, that published in 2019. So that was so I had, like, basically a year and change. I had a little bit more time with that one to write. This book I wrote pretty quickly, but it just happened that I sort of got into a groove with writing it. And, for me, writing begets writing. If, when I get into a groove with it, I can knock out a manuscript in, 4 months, and then take another 6 months or so to revise it. But, the stars sort of have to align, and they did with this particular book. This next book, that's not happening that way. So.
So it doesn't just get easier as you go.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's sort of, I don't think it's going to be a linear journey. I think it's more, some books are easy, and some books are a little, depending on what's going on in my life too. It's
Mhm.
not the most creatively inspiring time right now, especially so my kids are almost 22, 21, 20, and 17. yeah, almost 18. Yeah, they're on those like weird. So, there's a lot of quasi adults in my house that have big footprints and big personalities. So it's lovely, but it's a lot of, it's not like they're all off at school and I just sit in my office and write anymore. And we
Right.
have a lab, we have a
Grocery
pup.
bill too.
Yeah, we have a dog who he's a year, but he's a big 80-pound lab. So he takes a lot of my time up too, which I'm happy for it. I think it's all, you got to trust the moment that you're in, and I'm sort of going with it, and putting a couple hours in at the desk, but letting myself have a little bit of freedom too.
Mhm. Yeah. So one more question from our readers. So Gail from Somerset, New Jersey, is curious about the title. Where did the title come from? How did you come up with that?
Oh, so the title is actually in chapter 3 of the book. It's when Leo's father, if you haven't read the book yet, Leo's father is actually commenting on Brian and Anne, who are Sky's parents, who pass away. And he sort of, very fondly of them says, those two are they're sort of my kind of people. Um, and I don't want to give any spoiler alerts away, but Brian and Anne are one thing on the outside and sort of a different thing on the inside and struggling. And so I thought it was the title to me sort of encapsulates a little bit about all the characters in the book, and they're sort of all struggling with something, and whether or not they how they want to be seen, or how they feel like things are being seen. And it really sort of, I don't think you can really know somebody from the outside. So that's really where the title came from.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was a really, I mean, it was a very well crafted part of the novel that was woven through each of the characters' lives and chapters so well, of of this sense of I think the saying is something about, like, you can never understand somebody else's marriage from the outside, but
Yeah,
but also families as well,
right.
and the different ways that plays out for each of the characters. I mean, all the way down to the children in the book, Sky
Yeah,
and her best friend.
right, right. Yeah, and I think I also loved when one thing that I really wanted to work through the book as well, the epigraph, which is Paul Gauguin, which is I shut my eyes in order to see. Because I think every character in the book as well is really struggling with, trusting the inside of what they feel, as opposed to sort of what they're being told. You know, Maggie's being told sort of one thing from her husband, and she's being, sort of led to believe that everything is fine, but she really knows that it's not. Um, did I lose you?
We can still hear you. You're frozen, but you'll probably just come back in a sec. Or maybe not. Are you still here? See if
No.
hold, please. See, now we really do need the Zoom hold music.
I think you can pause the recording if you want.
Oh, I'm going to do that. Thank you.
Oh, no, we were talking about I shut my eyes in order to see, and how
Okay.
how each of the characters really has to sort of figure out how they feel without sort of being told what's going on around them. So that was another part of it that I really feel like sort of helped me get to the root of what all these characters were, what they were trying to go through.
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, like, I think that, you really get a sense of each of these characters, and, and there's so much you can relate to. I think that, even from one to the next, there is this common thread of, that humanity that kind of connects
Yeah.
us all.
Well, that's great.
So we have just a few minutes left, and we wanted to we have two questions that we always ask our
Yep.
authors. One of them is, do you have a beverage of choice that you bring to your writing desk, or that you like to read?
Yeah. So I do. I have. So this is my. It's actually cranberry juice with a seltzer, diet cranberry juice, and seltzer. And I usually drink it, like at lunchtime or so, or at night. And so those are my that's like my go-to when I don't. Usually, coffee in the morning is huge. I can't exist without coffee. So after coffee, and then sort of lunchtime, I'll have that, and that's sort of like. I always think of it as sort of like a treat to myself. It's a little bit, better than water. I'm one of those people that my husband will say like, oh, I drink water all day. I'm like, oh, I'll drink it, but I need to like spice it up a little bit. So that's my beverage of choice.
Yeah, I now cannot live without my soda stream. It's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I just like a little bit of something,
Little
and
zing,
I really, yeah, something.
Awesome. And then our other question is, what was the last sort of 5-star read?
Oh, so I have a couple actually. So, there's a couple books I just picked up to read. Fast Girls by Elise Hooper. I'm really looking forward to, and I'm reading also. I just picked up How to Be an Anti-Racist by, I think it's from Kendi. I think it is. So those are two that I'm looking forward to. But my 5-star reads, this is Once More to the Rodeo by Calvin Hennick. And he is a local Boston area writer, and it's about Calvin's experience. It's a memoir, and it's about his experience as a white father raising a biracial son. And it's an amazing, amazing book. And I was able to see Calvin. He is a peer of mine as well, and I was able to go to when they did in-person events. And this book was a long time in the making for him, and it's a really profound story, but it's also beautifully written. So I would recommend it highly.
That's excellent. Now, you broke up just a little bit when you were talking about the second book. Was it the Ibram Kendi?
Yes.
How to Be
Yeah.
Yes. Great.
Yes. So those are two books that I just picked up from my local indie that I'm really looking forward to reading. And Elise Hooper, who wrote Fast Girls, is actually in, we had a debut in 2017 from the Salt House, and she was in that, and that's how I met her. And she's on her she's on her fourth book, and so happy to see her success. And she writes really wonderful. This particular book is about the 1939 Olympics, about a women's running team. So I'm looking forward to it.
That sounds awesome. Well,
Yeah.
Lisa, we want to thank you so much for joining us and for jumping through several hoops. We did reschedule this twice between current events and hurricanes and Mother Nature, and I mean it's just this is a 2020 author event right now.
Yeah,
so,
it's been great, and I think it was probably my computer. I don't know I lost you, so. Hopefully you can still see me, but it was so nice to be part of your silent book group, and you guys are great. So I was really happy to be here.
Thanks again. So I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording now. We will be back I'm making sure that I've got the date right here, on August 18th. So in 2 weeks, our next author chat will be about a book called Self-Care by Lee Stein. It is a really fun one. It talks all about sort of, corporate feminism and kind of skewering those Instagram influencers. So that should be a really fun one. If you haven't yet had a chance to pick up a copy of My Kind of People, highly recommend it. Like I said, I loved the audiobook. So our friends over at Libro.fm, all of their audiobook sales give a portion back to indie bookstores. And if you're a new member, you can sign up with the code SBC and get 2 books for the price of 1. Woo! So
Yeah.
that is my pitch and my spiel. Lisa, have a wonderful evening. Good luck with your next project. And thank you again.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe, wear a mask, vote.
Yes.
Bye-bye.